Welcome. My name is Roberta Kowald, and this is one in a series of presentations on racism and racial presence and racial absence in media called I'm Not There. This section focuses on African American males in the media. So in this, one of the things that happens is Hollywood portrays African American males in very specific kinds of ways. And so you have this interesting juxtaposition of not only racial presence, but also racial absence. So for example, to talk about racial absence, one of the first things you notice that often happens in Hollywood and television productions is Black people don't live in the cities that have high concentrations of African American folk living in there anyway. So I call this, Black people don't live in New York or Philadelphia. So you have these numbers of series that keep getting produced and produced and produced and produced over the years in which there are no people of color. The cast is white, the people in the shows are white, the people they interact with are white, their neighbors are white, the people in the street scenes are all white. So you've got Hot in Cleveland, Shot in Cleveland, theoretically shot in Cleveland. How I Met Your Mother is in New York. Two and a Half Men is, I think, in LA. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, obviously in Philadelphia. Justified and Girls, which also takes place in New York. All of these urban centers have large concentrations of people of color, but you never actually see them. So I noticed with Girls, even when they're walking down the street, you never see any people of color. There's never any people of color in a coffee shop. There's never any people of color at the grocery store. It's this sea of white people. So this idea that Black people live in Black people television land, where, and you kind of see the same sort of thing where, they'll make a show, there'll be a show about a Black family, but they only interact with other Black people. So there's never any interaction between these groups of people. So they're present, but they're incredibly isolated from the reality of what's going on in the community. So media portrays racial and gender groups very differently, and there's a big difference between how white male characters get portrayed and how Black male characters are portrayed. White male characters are inevitably shown as being powerful or strong, rational. That's a big one. They're the hero. They're the main character. For Black male characters, what you often see is that instead of being powerful, they're menacing. Instead of being rational, they're disruptive and unruly. Instead of being the hero, they're the comic relief or they're the sidekick. And when they are the main character, they're often what I would refer to as a stereotype that we refer to as the magical Negro. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the one thing that we have to keep dealing with is the fact that most of the imagery that we see about African Americans goes back to pre-Civil War, pre-slave era, and even further back than that. So you see this kind of thing quite a lot. And again, this is Vogue magazine, who I would point out should know better. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got this old, it's actually an interesting portrayal of Germany, as in this case, actually, as the Mad Brute. But it's the unknown terrible thing is a monkey, and it's very much a King Kong reference. So you've got this King Kong idea of the King Kong who comes and takes the white girl and captures her for his own terrible usages. But then you've got this kind of image also echoed in this Vogue magazine cover on the right-hand side of the screen. So you've got, the lovely Giselle and LeBron James. And I've had students try to rationalize this to me by saying, no, what they're really trying to say is that LeBron James he's very big, loud player. He's very powerful. And I said, okay, so I get that, you're saying he's an animal on the court, but my point always is, why a monkey? If you're going to portray him as a powerful animal on the court, why aren't you using a lion or a big cat or a horse or an eagle? So you have to understand that the type of image becomes very specific. So this isn't just about portraying, this cover is not about portraying LeBron James as this amazing, fit star athlete. It's very much embedded in this imagery of King Kong, a giant monkey. And I'll talk about monkeys later when we talk about the current political discourse. But this constant repetition of black man as ape, black man as less than human. He is somehow some kind of monkey that's managing to pretend to walk upright and be one of us, but in actual fact, he's not really human. This is very interesting, this next slide. Time magazine actually got in a lot of trouble for this. And the thing that's interesting here is the repetition of the idea that the darker the skin, the blacker you are, the more menacing you are. This is two magazine covers from the O.J. Simpson trial, both featuring exactly the same picture. This is the mug shot that was taken of O.J. when he was arrested. Now, on the left, we have Newsweek's headline, Trail of Blood. That's a pretty accurate portrayal of his, of what he looks like when his mugshot was done. On the right-hand side, though, look what Time Magazine has done. Time Magazine admitted, first they tried to palm it off saying, no, we didn't really do this, it wasn't our fault. Then they finally admitted later that they had actually gone in and deliberately darkened his face. They had deliberately made his skin color blacker, and they had deliberately added in all of these shadows to make him look more menacing. And again, think about the juxtaposition of the blacker you are, the scarier you are, the more frightening, the more menacing you are. So this gets repeated a lot. So when we talk about the African American male as not being ever shown as the lead character, this continues to keep happening. So even in, again, this isn't something that happened back in the 60s or back in the day. So, right now we've got Rush with Lawrence Tate, who plays a medical doctor. That's good. But he's kind of a goofy medical doctor. He's very anal retentive, and he's played as he's the comic relief to the more serious doctor who's the main character. Then you've got Omar Dorsey, who's Ray Donovan. This is a really interesting character because, he's a very strong, powerful man. But embedded in his character is, he's a music producer, but more importantly, he is an ex-felon. And so many of the storylines, when you read about the show, it's, he's an ex-felon, and at any moment he could go off and become violent and do what he's really supposed to do all the time. So again, there's this constant repetition of beware of black men because at any moment they could turn violent. So then now we kind of have this kind of interesting thing that happens in Hollywood and television where they the TV stations are the good news is they're extremely sensitive to flack from the community about their shows. So they'll do things like, they'll hear, oh, gee, we don't have any black characters. So they will suddenly start shoehorning a bunch of black characters into shows to show that they're not being racist. So it's become kind of an interesting joke with The Walking Dead. And it's spanned a slew of criticism and a host of internet memes that The Walking Dead, which has an unusually racially diverse cast, most post-apocalyptic stories have apparently all the black people and people of color got wiped out because there's only ever white people left. But it's also interesting because the community's also been very sensitive to this and said it's fascinating because every time there's a black guy, there's only one, and there's only and if there's another black character, then the original black, then one of them has to die because you can't have two black guys in the same show. So it's become this sort of running joke, and that's the picture here. T-Dog has reached what no black man has reached before, season 3. There's another phenomenon that's also we've noticed, those of us that sort of deal with sort of commentary of media, and it's what we call the one black friend rule. And it's where you have a movie or a TV show that features a group of friends. There's almost never more than one person of color in the group. You never have a black person and a Hispanic person. It's always a bunch of white people and then one black person. again, because Hollywood's got a little more sensitive to how they have racial diversity. But then it's interesting. So they shoehorn a character in there. But then what's also interesting is then what do they do with them? Well, what's always interesting is what happens to the one black friend. So you've got the OBF, that's what we call it for short. And the OBF is never the love interest. This is never a character that gets the girl or is anybody, and it's the one that everybody wants to be with. That's never the one. He's never the player. He's never the background person. He's always in the background. He's never the love interest or the main character. And if the OBF dates, they date outside the group. So, for example, look at New Girl, which is kind of interesting because you do have a female character of color, sort of. Although it's very interesting because even though the actress that plays Cece is actually multiracial, they don't really talk about that in the show. But you think about the character, the African American character in New Girl. I have trouble remembering his name because he's featured so little and there's so few. Whenever there is a storyline about him, it is always about him in isolation. It's never about him in cohort with the rest of the group. We're going to have the storyline about this guy. Big Bang Theory, you have the character of Raj. Raj doesn't get to in fact, there's a whole sort of story arc where Penny finds out that Raj is really a sweet guy and he's really, in many ways, perfect boyfriend material, but she doesn't date him. And there's a whole big thing about, they're just going to be friends. Because she can't, because of the OBF, because he's the OBF, you can't have the person of color date any of the other characters in the show. It has to be outside. So whenever Raj's romantic life is introduced, he always has to date outside the group. We have to find Raj a girlfriend and bring some girl in from outside to bring her into the group so that Raj can have a girlfriend. And this is changing now. I will say this is actually changing, and I think it's interesting that one of the places where we're actually seeing some changes is in video gaming. And generally, though, and they're doing better. For a long time, there were no people of color in video games. That's changing. We're seeing way more people of color in video games. Generally, though, again, it's not so much about the presence, it's about what do these characters do? Is this a character that's playable? Is this a character that's just a sort of stock character to move the story along? Or is this someone you can play? When you set up a number of games have avatars that you can design. Is there a place for you to design an avatar that's a character of color? Can you make a character that looks like you? Do they let you have a black? Can you be a black person? Can you be an Asian Pacific Island person? Can you be Native American? Is there an avatar that allows you to be a playable character in the video game that is a person of color? Those are still kind of thin on the ground and fairly underrepresented. So let's talk quickly about the magical Negro. This is one of those times where what appears to be a positive stereotype actually has some ugly undertones to it. So you see this quite often. So you have The Matrix, you have The Legend of Bagger Vance, you have The Green Mile, and Legendary, all contain these sort of magical male characters whose only purpose of existence is to help the questing white hero. They set him right. They help everybody see that they're really bad people. They help everybody understand the great cosmic significance of everything. And I will say this is not actually this has now started to be something that we're seeing in female characters, which is a little unusual and not good. So in the Sex and the City movie, Sarah Jessica Parker finds a woman that she actually keeps referring to as Saint Louise. And Saint Louise's job is to do nothing except serve Sarah Jessica Parker's character, Carrie Bradshaw. Carrie Bradshaw can't figure out how to operate she can't figure out how to do email. And so Sarah, St. Louise comes along and tells her how to do this and fixes her life and gets her romance back again. And then she just sort of magically wafts away and leaves. So the magical Negro has this uncanny ability to say and do exactly what needs to be said or done, but it's always in order to keep the white hero on track and stand in service to them. They have no other